So this is another session of our community conversations for Designcenter, an enablement session today for Solid Edge. The topic, as you can see, is mastering large assembly performance in Solid Edge. And we're very happy to be able to offer this to you again. My name is Taryn Blake. I am the Community Engagement Program Manager and your host for today. So introducing our speaker, who is Nitin Malvakar. I hope I got close to pronouncing that correctly. But Nitin is a pre-sales engineer with 14 plus years of experience, specializing in technical business development for CAD, CAM, and CAE solutions. So he's skilled in sales enablement, delivering compelling product demonstrations, which we'll see today, and fostering cross-functional collaboration to drive successful customer outcomes and business growth for us here at Siemens Software. That is all for my introduction. So Nitin, you can take the screen.
All right, perfect. Thank you. So, hello everyone. My name is Nitin Malvatkar, and welcome to the session on the best practices while working on large assemblies. Just to give you a very brief introduction about myself, I'm part of the global technical enablement team for Solid Edge and its portfolio of products. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm having some issues with the Wi-Fi, or especially the bandwidth. So I'm just going to turn off the camera, and then we can start off with the session. Now, this is the agenda that we have planned for today. So we'll start off with having a look at display configurations and then creating zones within the assembly. Then we'll cover the part selection tool, which is actually a very useful tool and can help you find and filter components while working with really large assemblies. Next, we'll have a look at some of the enhancements that we've made over the last few releases, like the large assembly performance mode, internal components, and finally, the large assembly preview mode. So let's start with the display configurations for large assemblies. So what exactly is a display configuration? Well, it's a feature by which we can control which part are shown or hidden in an assembly. So instead of loading the entire assembly every time, what we can do is we can open the assembly using a specific display configuration. Now, this in turn loads only the required components into the memory. And this actually helps in improving the performance significantly of the assembly. Now, the best part about the display configurations is that it's not limited just for modeling. What I mean by that is, let's say, for example, we want to create a drawing view. Then using display configurations, only the components which are visible in the selected configurations are displayed. So the rest of the components are completely hidden. Similarly, let's say, for example, you want to generate a part list. Then using the display configurations, we can filter the bill of material automatically. So to include only the visible components from that configuration. Another useful tool is the configuration manager. Now, the configuration manager can be used to clean up and quickly remove the components which are not required. So in case if you have deleted some components from the assembly, then these can be quickly removed and the display configurations can be accordingly updated. Now we have another useful tool, which is called as snapshot display configurations. Now suppose you have made some changes to an existing assembly. You have hidden some parts so that you can concentrate only on the single part, or maybe you want to concentrate only on a sub-assembly within the main assembly, right? Then what you can do is we can capture the state of the assembly with the help of the snapshot. Now this snapshot gets stored in the display configurations. Now these snapshots are very useful for reviews, discussions, or even isolating some problems in the designs quickly. Now let's have a look at some additional capabilities of the display configurations. So first off, you're not limited to viewing just one display configuration at a time. What that means is you can actually select multiple display configurations simultaneously using the checkboxes that we see over here. Now, what this does is helps in combining different views of the assembly without having to create a new configuration. Next, if you're working on a subassembly, Solid Edge actually allows you to access and use the display configuration which are defined within the subassembly. Now, this is pretty useful. Especially when you're working with, let's say, modular designs, or sometimes if you're working on assemblies from your suppliers, right, where your configurations are already predefined by them. Now we have another useful feature, which is called grouping. So this grouping feature helps in simplifying the assembly tree and makes the navigation very easier for users, for especially for those who are working on very large assemblies. So with the grouping tool, what we can do is we can actually group together parts which are identical, or maybe you're working on some parts which are outsourced for manufacturing, or maybe you have some bought-out items for quick identification in the Pathfinder. All right. So just note that this Pathfinder grouping is purely organizational. What I mean by that is that it does not affect the bill of material or the part structure in any way. So because of this, it can be safely used to get additional clarity as well as the performance from the assembly. Now let's have a look at a small example. All right. So what we see over here is a cheese factory by a company called Tornado. Now you can see it's a pretty large assembly, right? Now what we are going to do is we are going to start by having a look at the display configurations. All right. So within the home tab, you can see that we have access to display configurations. Now we have already created a couple of display configurations. The first one is the tornado plan. The second one is floor layout. Now let's say I want to have a look at the floor layout. So I just check this floor layout and say OK. And within a few seconds, you can see the complete layout that we have over here. All right. So again, this is something which you can easily, have. I mean, if you have some certain sub-assemblies that you're looking for, then with the use of display configurations, you can easily access them. Now, it's not necessary that you have to open the assembly in order to go into display configurations. What you can do is before you open the assembly, you can actually go to, let's say this is assembly, and then I can go to open as. And if you're going to open as, from here you have the option of opening the configuration. So you don't need to have to open the complete assembly and then choose the configuration that you want. All right, so just go to open as. Within the configurations, you can choose whatever configurations that you're looking for. All right. Now let's do one thing. Let's create a display configuration of our own. So what we want to do is, in this example, I am looking for packaging. All right, so we have some packaging machines over here. So let's go and start looking out for the packaging machines. Now, if you have a look at the Pathfinder, there are quite a few parts in it. So it's going to be very tedious for us to go and search for the packaging machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make use of the command that we have, which is called find components. Now, this is again a very useful tool, especially when you want to find components which are there inside your assembly, and if you're working at very large assemblies. So this is kind of a filter. Now, this filter can be based on different types of properties. It can be with the help of name. If you're looking for a particular part which has been created by a particular author, so you can choose by author. Even if you are looking for a revision number, so whatever key names that you have, you can just key in. So in this example, I'm going to go with category, and I've already keyed in the value as packaging. So once I have entered that, I'm just going to click on find. Now, what this is going to do is going to go through the complete assembly and is going to find out all the different parts which has packaging against its name. Now, bear in mind, this does take a few seconds, depending upon the size of the assembly that you have. So if you have relatively a small assembly, then you can get the results quickly. But if you have a large assembly like this one, then this does take some time. But then again, you'll find that it's totally worth it, because instead of you having to go inside the Pathfinder and specifically search for those components, this does that for you. So once it's found those components, you can see that it has been highlighted in the green color, right? So what next we can do is I can just close this window because it has already found the components that I'm looking for. Now what I want to do is I want to see only the components that we have highlighted. So let's give it a few seconds. Yeah, so if I right click on this, I have different options. So let's say we can either hide those or we can only show those. But I want to use the show only options because I want to concentrate only on those machines, and I want to hide the rest of the components. So I can click on show only. So again, it's going to hide all the components for me. Next, like I said, I'm creating a new display configuration, right? So maybe I want to add the factory flow. I want to see the factory flow and how packaging looks on top of that factory flow. All right, so I can do this. Now maybe I need to make some modifications to this. This package machine that you see over here, I need to add another couple of machines. So what I'm simply going to do is I'm going to do a window select of these machines. Select this, and with the help of synchronous, I can just drag it. And I'm just going to key in somewhere close to, let's say, 1500. All right. Okay, so I've added one. Let's add a couple of them. So I'll just select this again, pressing Control. I'm just going to drag this arrow so that I can move this and I can add the dimensions over here, which is going to be somewhere close to 3000, and enter. So again, within a few seconds, what we have done is we have added 3 more packaging machines over here. All right. Now, this is something which I'm interested in. This is the configuration that I want. So I want to save this now. So what am I going to do? I'm just going to go inside my display configurations. Over here, it will list you all the display configurations that we already have. I'm going to click on new, and I'm just going to key in a name, let's say packaging machines. All right. Now you'll see that it shows up over here in the list. Now, in case if you have added something over here, what we can do is you can just select this and then update and then close. Now you'll see that this packaging machine option has been added inside the display configurations. All right, you can see it from here as well. Now, what I want to do is, I want to concentrate on this packaging machine, because this is something which we are discussing within my design team, and there's some issues which I found inside this packaging machine. So what I want to do is I want to see only those packaging machines, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Show Only. Now, this is something which this is just the thing which I want, and I just want to capture an image of this so that I can easily show this to my design team. So instead of having to go and create a new display configuration, what I can do is I can make use of snapshot. So what I do is if I click on snapshot, it's now going to capture a snapshot of these 4 packaging machines that we have over here. All right. So if I want to do that, I mean, if I go back to my configuration, and if I want to come back over here, I just click on Restore Snapshot. So once I do that, then you can see that, okay, these are the packaging machines that I had in mind, and this is something which was bothering me. So now I can discuss with my team, that I have some issue with this. Let's easily go ahead and do this. All right. So this was a very quick look at what we can do with display configurations. Now, moving along, let's have a look at zones. All right. Now, zones are used to define a 3D envelope or a box within a large assembly. All right. So what we do is once we define a zone, then Solid Edge will show only the components that are fully inside, or the components that are enveloping with the cone that we have just created. Now, again, this is very useful in large assemblies where loading or displaying everything at once is pretty time consuming. Now, this is also very useful, especially when you have multiple users working on the assembly, where different engineers are responsible for different areas of the model. All right. So in this case, let's say instead of opening the complete assembly, each user, what they can do is they can create and focus only on that assigned zone. And this will help them in reducing the visual clutter, and also help them in improving the performance of the assembly for them. We can also open the assemblies directly from the open menu using the defined zone. So this is exactly similar to what we just now saw with display configurations as well. That is, all we need to do is go to Open As, and from here, choose the correct display configuration or the zone that you're looking for. Now, similar to display configurations, zones can also be used to generate drawing views as well. Now, this will ensure that the drawings contain only the components which have been defined within that specific zone. Now, overall, you'll find that the zones actually help a lot in improving your performance as well as collaboration, and actually help you in focusing when you're working with large assemblies. Now, one advantage of zones is that these zones behave like dynamic display configurations. What that means is you can easily modify the zones to add or remove components from it. All right. Now, another feature of zones is that while creating the zone, we can quickly show only the paths that are inside a zone, or the paths that are inside and overlapping the zone boundary. So let's have a look at an example of these zones. All right, to access zones, you can go inside your select tools, and over here you can see that I already created a zone. All right, so it says holding tanks. Now, if I want to see that zone, right, or if I want to see the envelope, what I can do is I can right click on the holding tanks and I can say show the zone box. All right, so you can see that the box that I've created or the envelope I've created for this zone. Now, if I want to see only the components within the zone, what I can do is I can just double click on this zone. So if I double click on this zone, it's going to hide the rest of the components for me. All right. So once this is done, you can see that I have hidden rest of the components, and now from a designer's perspective, I can concentrate on only the design that I'm assigned to. All right. Now, in case if I want to make some modifications, you see the stairs that we have over here, right? So I don't want those stairs. I want to exclude those stairs. Again, not a problem. It's pretty easy. What we can do is we can just click on these zones and you get an edit button, edit definition, click on that and click on the modify size step. Once I click on modify size step, now you can choose whichever plane that you want to drag to increase or to reduce the size of the envelope. So let's say I select this face and I want to drag it back so that I can get rid of the stairs that we have. So once this is done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on finish. Now you can see that even though I've done with this, it's still showing me those stairs, right? Yeah, that's because I haven't activated the new zone. So if I want to activate the new zone, I double click on this zone and now you'll see that it has removed the staircase. All right. Similarly, if you want to, again, bring in the stairs, I'm working on a design and maybe you realize that you do need the stairs. Again, not a problem. Again, what you do is you click on this modify size step, select the face and just drag it so that, it includes the staircase. So I just click on this, finish. And if I double click on this, now you're able to see the stairs. All right, let's hide this zone box and let's go back to the floor layout. Now, what we saw was when you're working on an existing uh, um, zone. But now, what if you want to create a new zone? Okay, how do you do that? Again, it's very simple. You go to select tools. Now, over here, you have an option of creating zone. So if you click on create zone, over here is going to ask you which all parts do you want to include over here. So include in this zone. So what I can do is I can do a individual part select, or what I can do is I can just do a window select of this complete assembly. So once I do a window select of this assembly, you can see all those parts have been selected. Just click OK. Now it's going to create the envelope. Now, this envelope is based on the assembly that we have just created. Now, this is where you can define whether you want to make some changes to this envelope. Now, let's say, for example, I am not satisfied or I'm not happy with this envelope. I want to make some changes. So if I click on modify size step, I'm just going to select this face and I'm just going to drag it so that I can add some extra volume to it. All right. Once this is done, it's going to ask me what is the name that I want to store it with. So I want to say save it as filtration machine. Okay. Now it's going to ask me, whether I want to save only the components which are inside, or whether I want to, save some components which are overlapping with the zone. Now, since it is, pretty far from rest of the components, I'm just going to go with inside. In this case, I'm just going to click on finish. Once the zone is created, you can see that you can easily access it through over here. So I've created a filtration machine, so I can easily go and access it from here as well. So you can see that this easily shows me the zone that I'm interested in. Again, this is very useful, especially when you're working on a very large assembly which has multiple sub-assemblies on it. So it's not necessary for the user to keep on opening the complete assembly, right? So what they can do is, if they have created a certain zone for the designs that they are working on, instead of opening the complete assembly, what they can do is pretty similar to what we saw in display configurations. They can go to, again, right click on this, open as. So when you're trying to open that assembly, again, we have the option of opening the zone that you're looking for. So over here, it shows the holding tanks. Now, if you ask me why it's not showing the filtration, well, that's because we haven't saved this. Once we save this assembly, then it will be shown inside over there in that drop down as well. All right. So this is how you can create your zones. And again, like I said, if you want to hide the zone, you can right click on this and simply click on hide zone box. All right, let's go back to the floor layout. So this was basically a very quick idea about what zones are and how zones can actually help you while working with really large assemblies. So moving along, let's have a look at path selection. Now, in large assemblies, the biggest productivity killer is clutter, right? When you have lots and lots of parts, it becomes very difficult to work on it. So you'll see that Solid Edge has quite a few unique part selection tools which help us to focus only on what matters to you as a designer within the assembly. So with these tools, what we can do is we can quickly select small parts based on size. We also have the option of selecting only the visible parts. Now, this is very useful in creating the new zones or the display configurations that we just now saw. We can also select parts which are constrained to a specific component. So let's say you have a particular component and you have already assigned some other parts or other sub-assemblies which are specifically constrained to that part. You can use this option. And finally, we can quickly select identical parts and assemblies across the assembly. Across the assembly as well. So what these options do is they actually help you in reducing the on-screen complexity of the assembly. And in turn, it helps you, the designers, to edit faster and make your designs much more accurate. Now, something which is very important from the list that we just now saw is the part selection based on size. Now, this particular feature, it helps in quickly isolating and removing small or insignificant components from your view. So this is very useful, especially for hiding hardwares like bolts, nuts, washers, or even minor hardware like fittings and all. A lot of times what happens is when you're working on large assemblies, these are primarily like bought-out items, right? So these are not really important. So what happens is, when you have these nuts and bolts and washers, you must have noticed it takes a long time because the computer keeps on processing all of these components as well. So in case if you're trying to open a large assembly, you will see that it takes a long time, right? So what we can do is with the help of this tool, we can hide, we can select all those washers and nuts or small components, and then we can hide these components altogether. Now, another option available within part display configuration is unload these hidden parts. So what that does is these, once you have unloaded these hidden parts, these parts that you have unloaded are not stored on the disk anymore. And this in turn helps improve the graphic performance. Now we have one more option, but this option is hidden in Solid Edge options. And this is called as fast locate box display. So now instead of highlighting every face and edge while selecting a part, now you must have noticed, especially when you're working on a very large assembly, when you're trying to select a face, you'll see that it's pretty time consuming and memory consuming. You'll see that it selects each and every particular edge and a particular face one at a time, right? So what we can do is we can use this fast locate box display. So what it does, it uses a simple bounding box. So it creates a bounding box across the area of the interest. That means it might be a part, it might be a sub-assembly. And this this results in much faster selection response and smoother interaction with very large models. Now, as I mentioned before, this is something which can be activated within Solid Edge options and the assembly tab. So if you go to Solid Edge options, and from here, if you go to the assembly tab, this is where you'll find this options of fast locate using box display for paths. Now let's look at a small example of path selection and fast locate. So again, let's go with the assembly that we have over here. Now, first off, what we are going to do is we are going to start off with the select part by size. So like I said, this is actually a very useful tool, especially for finding a small components. Now, over here, you're going to start off with part size. Now, if you're if you're asking, if you want to know what part size is, as this mentions over here, the part size is a range between 1 to 100. Where 100 is the largest part size, that is the biggest part that you have within the assembly, and 1 is the smallest part size, which is visible inside the assembly. All right. So all the other parts that we see over here lie within this range. All right. So what we can do is we need to find all the small parts. Now, there are two ways to do it. If you are looking for a large parts, then of course you can go for larger and equal to. But since we are looking for small parts like hardwares and all that, I'm going to stick with small and equal to. Once I've selected this, I'm going to click on next. So it seems that nothing has happened, right? You can see that only 4 items have been selected. That's okay. So I think most of the components have not been selected. So if I click on next again, now you'll see that somewhere close to 1,436 items have been selected. So you can see if I zoom into this, you can see a lot of small components have been selected. All of these are hardware components. All right. Now, what is happening over here is because of these small components. Now, this is hardware components or bought items, right? My memory is being consumed. Right, so because of this, my assembly is taking a long time to process and to move. To rotate and to zoom and all of these things. And I really don't require this in my main assembly. So what I can do is I can hide this. So once I selected all these small hardware components, I can click on accept. Once I click on accept, you can see that this is all, these components are still selected. I can right click on this and I can say hide. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide this. And now if I want, I can create a new display configuration. So the next time when I access this assembly, right, the computer doesn't spend time trying to process all these small components. Now, one more option that we have over here is the option of unloading hidden parts. So like I mentioned before, if I click on unload hidden parts, what it's going to do is going to remove these components from the memory. So this is very useful, especially when you're working on a large assembly and you have a limited RAM with you on the system, right? So you don't need to have these components. You can unload this all together from your memory, right? So again, a pretty useful tool. Now you can see that the performance is a little bit better because you have unloaded this from your assembly. Now, one more thing which I wanted to do was this was a look at selecting parts by size. All right. The next step is selecting visible parts. Now, let's say, for example, you are digging into a certain display configuration, and or maybe you want to create a zone or something. So what I can do is I can just select the visible parts. Once I do that, I have the option of going and creating a zone, or even if I want to hide them or create a new display configurations, I can do that. All right. Again, a pretty useful selection tool. Now, next, which I want to do is I want to find identical parts. So you see this part over here, right? I know that you see that's 4 parts. Now, instead of me having to select those individual 4 components, what I can do is I can just select this component. And then within the selection tool, I have options of selecting either the identical subassemblies or I can select the identical parts. So in this case, let's say I want to create, I want to select all the identical parts. Once I do that, then I can go ahead with my other processor. Let's say, for example, I want to get into display configurations for this. So what I can do is I can click on show only, so that I can hide rest of the components, and then I can create a new display configuration if required. right? So again, pretty useful tool. Especially when you're working on, when you are working on an assembly, which has a lot of identical parts in it. So instead of you having to go and individually select all those parts, you can just click on this part and then go inside the selection manager, and then you can just select all identical parts. All right. Now this fine components we have already talked about, so I'm not going to spend time on this again. But again, it's a very useful tool, especially when you are working on large assemblies with thousands of parts. It just helps you to filter around and look out for a component that you're looking for. So that was about the part selection that we have. Next is what we wanted to have a look was the fast locate box display. So you'll see that, if I take my cursor over this cylinder, it's highlighting the cylinder, it's selecting the face as well as the edges, right? So let me come out of this. Now you can see that it is selecting the edges as well as the face, right? Now, since this is relatively a medium-sized assembly, it's okay. I mean, like if you have literally thousands of or million parts in it, it becomes very difficult, right, to select those components. So what we can do is, if we go inside options, and if I go to assembly, and within assembly, we can find that we have the option of fast locate options. So if you go with fast locate options, we have the option of fast locate box display for parts. Once I select this, you'll see that it is automatically selected the display option for assemblies as well. That's okay. I click on apply, say okay. Now, you'll see that as I bring my cursor over any particular component, now it's selecting directly the box, right? So instead of the computer spending time trying to process each and individual face as well as edge, you can see that it's very easy to quickly select that part, and then I can go ahead with whether I want to edit it or whether I want to open it and all of those things, right? So again, if you feel that it's taking a long time for you to select a particular component and all of this is, maybe you can try using this. So again, just to let you know, you can go inside assembly within Solid Edge options, assembly, and we have this option of fast locate box display for parts and assemblies. For this I'm just going to switch this off. All right. Before we go to the next topic, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to close this and I'm going to open another assembly in the background. Let's go ahead with my presentation. So the next topic that we wanted to talk to you about was large assembly performance mode. Now, this is a dedicated high performance mode, which is primarily designed to improve the responsiveness as and when we add additional components within the assembly. All right. So this mode automatically gets activated based on the number of components, and these number of components are defined within the Solid Edge options by the user. Now, the purpose of this performance mode is to optimize the memory usage and the interaction speed within the assembly. So what large assembly performance mode does is it forces several best practices settings automatically. You'll find that both, that is the display and the interaction behaviors, are adjusted to improve the performance. Now, just note that this mode applies only to the currently active assembly and not globally. All right, so this is only specific to the assembly that you are trying to open. And again, in case if it's not needed, you think you don't need this large assembly performance mode, then users have the option to manually exit the mode from the ribbon. Now, just a very important note, this mode does not help in opening assemblies faster. This mode is specifically meant for improving the performance after opening. So when the performance mode is on, we will find that several view tabs options are disabled from Solid Edge options. Now, these view options typically consume higher graphics power, and that's why these are automatically disabled when the user selects a large assembly performance mode. So once we disable these options, we can see that we get a consistent performance, and we actually avoid slow performance of assemblies. Again, just to note, this is intentional, and this is aligned with the best practices for large assemblies. You'll also notice that several assembly tab options are also inactive while the performance mode is enabled. Okay, so how does it work? So let's say you're working on large assembly, and the assembly exceeds the defined part limit. Now, in this case, what happens is the system will prompt on the user. They'll ask whether they want to use the large assembly performance mode or not. Now, if you choose yes, of course, it's going to enable the performance mode for that specific session. Now, if you choose no, what it does is, of course, it keeps the mode off. But then again, bear in mind, this is for the current session. It's not a permanent thing. And we also have the option of do not show again. So this is something which gets resetted or resets rather when the Solid Edge is restarted again. Now, the limit for activating this large assembly performance mode is calculated as total parts plus total subassemblies. All right, so let's have a look at another example. All right. So I'm sure a lot of you must have seen this. This is a truck from a company called Siltomac. All right. So you'll see that over here, if I zoom into this, you'll see that we have a lot of shadows, and we have reflections and all of these things, right? Now, at times it becomes very difficult to, work around with this assembly. Though it looks like a small assembly, but it's a pretty heavy assembly. Just to rotate this and just to zoom into this, you can see that we have a small stutter, right? So it just stutters for a few seconds, and then it starts moving around. Now, this large assembly performance mode can be found inside the home option. So if I go inside the home tab, you will see that we see a small orange color icon, right? So once I click on this, you'll see that it has hidden all the shadows, and it has hidden all the reflections on all of these things. All right, and this actually in turn, helps to make your assembly a little bit lighter, and so that you can easily maneuver about your assembly. Now, one more thing you'll notice, especially when you're selecting the components, right? Let's say I want to select this component. So normally what happens is if I select this particular component, that the complete parts get selected, right? But now you'll see that in the large assembly performance mode, only the edges are highlighted in the green color. All right. So again, just bear that in mind. Once if you see this, that means your large assembly performance mode is active. All right. So if I go inside my view options, and if I see my view overrides, you can see that I don't have any control over the cast shadows or the floor shadows and all of these things. All of these things are grayed out. Now, why is this grayed out? Again, to reiterate whatever I said, this is based on the best practices that we have seen while working on large assemblies. Now, again, from the user's point of view, they have complete flexibility whether they want to activate this or not. So if you're not comfortable with this, they want to they want the option to remove it, we can just click on this. So then it shows all the the complete shadows and everything else inside this design. All right. So again, a very, very useful tool. Large assembly performance mode. This is something which is very useful to, to work with your designs. All right. Now, when it comes to options, if you check this, and then if you go inside options, you can see what all is hidden for you. So if you go inside assembly, you can see that they show dynamic movements of components during flash fit. Again, this is completely hidden for you, so you won't have access to this. Again, the dim surrounding components when a selection is made in relationship pathfinder. Again, this is completely grayed out for you. Again, all of these get automatically grayed out the minute you can go and click your large assembly performance mode. All right, now let's talk about assembly preview mode. So assembly preview mode is primarily designed for providing users with fast access to large assemblies. So what happens is, like, instead of the users having to fully load the model, they can actually preview and control what all gets loaded. Now it is very ideal for, especially if you have a large assembly which you want to review, or there's an assembly that you want to expect, or maybe you want to select a certain assembly or a sub-assembly before editing it, right? So this particular option, that is assembly preview mode, it helps in reducing the initial loading time. So again, just to reiterate, the assembly preview workflow actually allows users to open an assembly quickly. They can easily hide or show parts within this using they can use display configurations, excuse me, and users can actually decide the scope of what actually needs to load before editing. So after previewing, what they can do is they can switch directly to edit assembly. And once you click on edit assembly, what it's going to do is going to load only the selected components. So for example, what we see over here is the whole bike in preview. All right. But now we want to work only on the front suspension. So with the help of assembly preview, what we can do is we can hide the rest of the models using display configurations. And once this display configuration is visible, we can now edit the assembly so that only these components are loaded to disk. Now, assembly preview, it uses separate geometry display and assembly structure data. Now, this data can be saved inside the top level assembly. Again, this data is being saved inside the top level assembly. Now, the whole question is, what exactly is assembly structure data and the geometry data? Okay, so when you talk about assembly structure data, it basically gives you a list of all the parts and sub-assemblies. It also gives you a list of all the constraints and relationships between each other. It also gives you a location with respect to each other. And finally, we get some additional metadata like, what's the part number of that assembly or that particular part, etc. So all of this is a part of assembly structure. Now, when you talk about geometry data, what it contains is all the vertices, the edges, the faces, and all of this kind of stuff. Even the colors and texture information, all of this is a part of geometry data. So loading this detailed geometry data for each and every single part is in the massive assembly can actually end up taking a long time. And because of this, you must have noticed that it consumes a lot of computer memory. So what Solid Edge does is that it actually creates a special lightweight data for large assemblies. That is, it creates a separate geometry display data and a structure data. Now, again, to create it, this data, when saved, will be saved inside the top level assembly. So when you save this file, the assembly files, you'll notice they do become a little larger. That is, the size of the assemblies actually become larger. But you'll also find that when you're trying to open this previews, it'll open much, much faster. So during preview, what happens is only the top level assembly is open. Full part files are not loaded at all. Right. Now just note that this save preview data is used only when Solid Edge detects a large assembly. Now, like I mentioned, you'll find that the assembly preview opens in a dedicated and a limited functions environment. So what that means is you don't have access to all the components which you normally get when you're opening an assembly. So once you open this assembly preview, you can see that you have an option of selecting components within the assembly. And if you have created some display configurations, of course, you have access to this display configurations to choose whatever configuration that you want to work on. You also have the option of manipulating different views and different styles. And the most important of them all is we have the option of measuring the dimensions. So this is actually very useful because a lot of times what happens is when you're working on a large assembly, a designer, let's say he just wants to get an idea as to what exactly is the dimensions of the particular part that he needs to create. So instead of wasting time trying to open the whole assembly, what you can do is you can use the assembly preview environment for opening a certain section of that. All right. But just note that there are no modeling tools available in this when you are inside the assembly preview environment. Over here, the focus is on opening the files fast for reviewing and deciding what to edit. Now, once you have selected the right configuration or have selected the right subassembly, now we can enter the full assembly environment. So in order to do that, what we can do is we get the option of a click on edit assembly. So you see the option of edit assembly over here. If you click on that, then all the components which are currently shown in the preview are loaded. Again, you'll see that this results in a much faster loading times. And just know that additional components can always be loaded later whenever they are required. Now, another feature that we've added is something you must have noticed, that we have introduced a new progress dialog box. Now, this clearly shows the three loading stages, that is the file loading, the assembly update, and display. Now, if you're working on assemblies, you must have seen this. This dialog box appears during opening the assembly normally, or when you're editing from the assembly preview. So now, like I mentioned a couple of versions back, what we did was we gave the users the option to ability to stop loading the file. So what this does is it does not kill Solid Edge, but now what it does is it just stops loading all of the components in the background to disk. So in turn, what it does is gives users better control while loading large assemblies. For example, if a user accidentally clicks on open file, right, wherein he just wanted to view the model. So now what he can do is, instead of waiting for the complete model to load, he can actually click on stop the file load so that it shows up only in the large assembly preview mode. Now here are some of the examples which highlight the real world time savings using assembly preview. Now you'll notice that in some cases, opening time has reduced from minutes to literally seconds. All right. Now, editing only selected part, it helps in reducing the load time as well. Now, this workflow is especially impactful and very useful for very large complex assemblies. So in this example, as you see, some of the assemblies, if you try to open it in a full assembly, it takes you 3 minutes and 10 seconds. But with the preview, it takes you just 41 seconds, right? And the large assembly or the cheese factory assembly that we saw, it had a total of 12,455 parts in it, right? So if you try to open it directly, it will take you 50 seconds. But with the help of open preview, it takes you 8 seconds. Now, edit assembly with all the parts shown, again, it takes you hardly 48 seconds. Like I mentioned, this is a very useful tool, especially when you just want to view the model or if you just want to review the model. All right, let's have a look at an example. So for those who have seen the What's New demos, right? This is the Bergner assembly, which I think we worked on in 2022. All right, so it's relatively a large assembly. So if you try to open it, you'll see that it automatically gives you an assembly preview. All right, and it's loading it in the background. Just give it a couple of seconds. Yeah. So again, within a few seconds, it has loaded this assembly. Now, when I say loaded, it has just loaded the graphics of this assembly. All right. So if you see this is what the assembly preview looks like. You see, you have only options of home and view. All right. So if you want to view this, I mean, if you want to view like different, high rendering, or if you want to change, how this model looks like, you have this complete option over here. If you want to add some section views and all that, you can do that. Again, if I go inside my home tab, you see that I have very limited options. Most important option is the measure option. Now, a lot of times what happens is the designers, they just want to quickly open this assembly and just have a look at, what is the size or what are the dimensions of a particular component so that they can create another component with respect to that. All right. So let's say, for example, I want to find out, what is the component of, what is the dimensions of this lid that we see over here. So once I select this, I can click on this. It's going to give me a perimeter as well as the surface area. Now, if I want to go for point to point, I have the option of using point to point, and I can easily select this point to point options as well. So if I click on point to point, you can see, what is the distance and all of those things. So basically, you can use all the options of measure and all just to get an idea as to what is the dimension of this components before creating a part based on that. All right. Now, like I said, you have complete control over this. You can, about how this assembly looks. If you want to hide some components, you can do that. Let's say, you also have the option to choose a particular configuration. So if you are already working on configurations, you've already created your display configurations, you can select that as well. So in this example, I'm going to use the main doser unit. All right. So once I do that, you can see the rest of the components have been hidden. All right. Now, what I want to do is I want to load only the components within this assembly. All right. So now if you click on Edit Assembly, now what Solid Edge is going to do is going to look at all the components which are available over here, which is visible over here rather, and then based on whatever is visible, it will load all the components for this assembly. So again, within a few seconds, you can see that it has loaded those components. And how do you realize when all the components have been loaded? You can see now all the features, all the commands are available for you. All right, the typical commands which you have when you're working on assembly, all of these are available for you now. So this way you can easily understand that the complete assembly has been loaded. All right. So again, a very, very useful tool, especially when you're working on very large assemblies and you just want to review your assembly. You just want to see your assembly. Then this preview assemblies is a very useful tool. So again, this is something which is very useful. This is something which we introduced a few years back. So what internal components do is they're actually representations of the model structures in Solid Edge, and they contain all the geometry and structure of an assembly within a single document. So with an internal component structure, the geometry, that is, we're talking about design bodies, the construction bodies, the sketches, reference planes, and coordinate systems, and PMI for multiple components and product structure are stored in the assembly level. So without the need of additional files and links. So in simple words, what happens is, a lot of times what happens is that the suppliers that you're working with, they give you the data. They share some data with you. Now, most of the times what happens is this data is in the form of either a parasolid, or it can be a part of JT, or it can be a step file, or even an IFC file. All right. So what we can do is we can actually open these files as internal components without going through the time-consuming process of having to translate and convert those files into Solid Edge. So again, I'm sure you must have noticed that if you're getting a parasolid file, or even if you're getting a step file, and if you want to bring it inside Solid Edge just for viewing, normally what happens, you click on open them. So again, you have to spend some time where Solid Edge actually goes through the process of translating it. Sometimes, depending upon the size of the assembly that we have, it takes quite some time, right? So this is what addresses that issue with the help of creating internal components. Now, just note that internal components cannot be created manually. All right. So this is something which can be created only when you have the following file types like parasolid, step, JT, and IFC. And you can also you cannot create additional occurrences of the internal references. Now, like I was saying, if you're working on internal components, you'll see that importing internal components is significantly faster. So like I mentioned before, the geometry is embedded directly inside the assembly. So what that means is individual files are not created when you are importing this data to disk, right? So what this does in turn is helps in opening the files quickly without having to individually translate these files to Solid Edge and then opening it. Just note that saving the assembly does not generate external files automatically, and it will not convert them into individual files. So here is an example of using internal components using a parasolid file. So if let's say we we wanted to open them externally, it would take us around 28 seconds to translate and open this 397 files within the assembly. But if I were to open it directly as an internal components, right, we find that we can open the same file within just 6 seconds. Now, when you're talking about internal components, again, a very useful tool is we can actually publish this to a traditional file structures. So let's say this internal components that you have that you have got from your suppliers, you open it quickly inside Solid Edge, and then you realize that, okay, fine, it meets your requirement, and now you want to use it inside other projects. All right. So instead of having to open this as internal components all the time, what we can do is we can actually publish them so that these get saved as the traditional Solid Edge files. Now, saving these internal components, again, it depends upon the selected part templates, like whether you're working a part or sheet metal. Let's have a look at a couple of examples of internal components. First, I would just like to give you an example, how we can open this internal components, and even if these are internal components, we can still work with them the same way that we work inside Solid Edge. As in, let's say, for example, if you open a subassembly, you want to provide some constraints to it, you can still do that. Now, another example is how we can store the individual files as parts. Once you realize that these are the parts that you would like to use for other future projects, then you want to convert them into Solid Edge parts. So we'll just have a look at how we can store all of these individual parts as well. All right. So let's have a look at an example. All right. So this is a small example that we have. I'm just going to click on Open As. So if I click on Open As, if I go to my options, you'll see now I have an option of checking whether I want to create the internal components or not. So again, this is at the user's discretion. Now I want to create this as internal component. So I'll say OK. I'll say open. It's going to ask me which template do I want to use. I'm going to use the isometric assembly. Again, this is a very, very simple example, but I just wanted to give you an example. Okay, even if you're working with internal components, we can still work with them exactly the same way how we would work on Solid Edge files, right? So these are all Parasolid files that we see over here. Now, if I go inside my assembly relationships manager, you can see that we have some predefined assembly relationships. You can see that all of these have been grounded. So what I want to do is I want the first two components to be grounded. The rest of these I can easily select and delete. All right. So I've deleted this assembly constraints for 1, 2, 3 components. Next, I want to add some components, constraints of my own, right? So I can go inside the assembly relationship assistant, and I'll just click on OK. I'll select this complete components. I'll select OK. I want to I want to get only the mate as well as axial align constraints. I don't want planar connect or anything else. I'll say process. It is automatically processed and is given me all the relevant constraints, and I'll say OK. So now if I go and drag the component, you can see that it is maintaining the constraints, right? Again, this is a Parasolid file that we have imported. Okay, this is not written to disk. It is still an internal component. And how do you know it's an internal component? You can see that it's on the left-hand side inside the Pathfinder. It has a different icon. Not only that, but if you go inside internal components, you can see that all the components are still listed over here. All right. So this is one way of easily opening the components as internal components. Now, this is a very small example, fair enough. But then let's say you have another component or another assembly which has been shared with you from a supplier, which has quite a few parts in it. So again, I'm going to go inside options. Inside these options, I'm just going to make sure that I'm going to create these internal components. All right. Again, it's a Parasolid file. Now, just to reiterate, if I were to open this assembly inside Solid Edge, it will take some time because it will individually translate all of these files and save those as parts, right? But now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open it on the assembly level directly. So if I click on open, I'm going to choose the isometric assembly, click OK. And literally within a few seconds, you can see I can see a complete visual representation of this icon of this subassembly. Solid file with quite a few components, something which should have taken me at least 1 or 2 minutes for it to translate and then save it into Solid Edge. But I'm able to open this quickly within hardly 5 or 6 seconds. I'm able to open it. We'll see that all these components are listed over here. All right. Now, similar to what we saw in the previous example, I can go ahead and provide the constraints to this subassembly as well. Now, once you realize that this is something which you're comfortable with, or this is something which you want to use for other projects as well, you want to publish them, right? You want to publish into a Solid Edge file. What you can do is you can go to internal components on the left-hand side on the Pathfinder, and you have an option of publish internal components. So it's going to ask you, where do you want to save it? Okay, I want to save it over here. Select the folder. And once you select this now, this is something new that we have added. We now have the option of choosing which all components do you want to publish. So if you want to select, if you want to publish all of them, by default, all of these will be selected. But in case if you don't want to publish all of them, if you want to, publish only a few certain parts of it, then you can easily, uncheck those icons. Once you select the list, I click on publish, and within a few seconds, it's going to publish those 24 components to disk. So once you do that, you will see that you have the complete assembly as well as the parts available for you to use inside other projects as well. Okay, so this was basically a quick look about how you can work with internal components. And you'll also see that once you have published this, the icons are pretty similar to what you have inside Solid Edge. All right, so all the parts have been loaded to disk. I mean, have been actually loaded, and you can easily access those parts now. All right, so that's what we had to show for these sessions. So during the session, as we see, we had a look at the display configurations, we had a look at zones, and if you're working on large assemblies, how you can use part selections for hiding some of the components which are not required. And we also had a look at some of the new enhancements that we have made over the last few years, like large assembly performance, internal components, as well as large assembly preview mode. I hope this session was useful for you. Now, let's have a look at the questions and we'll try to address them. If you're not able to address them, we'll definitely get back to you with the right answers.
You can click that right now and bookmark that link. That is the Siemens Solid Edge, Designcenter Solid Edge forums. And that is where the recording will be posted on Friday. So if you bookmark that, you'll already have it. And then the other one was, if you are interested to write a review on the G2 website, you can use that code, you can click the link to get there, and the marketing team will give you a $25 gift card as a sign of appreciation for that. And then my last thing is just about Realize Live. If you're not aware, this is our annual customer event. So it happens in Americas, it happens in Europe, and it happens in Asia Pacific. You can click the links there for more information on Detroit, on Amsterdam, and on the event in India and Bangalore. So that is all for announcements. So let's get these questions answered.
So I guess some of the questions are based on Teamcenter. How do you want to open them, and how do we open them inside Teamcenter? I think somebody has already shared the image of how do you open that. So I think that's it. And I think Sangamesh has also shared that. So, okay, Mark, I just wanted to check with you whether you're working on Teamcenter. Is this a managed mode or an unmanaged mode?
Okay, thank you. To be honest, I don't know how to really answer that question, and I don't know, when you say managed or unmanaged, what does that mean?
Is it, are you working on Teamcenter?
Oh,
Do you have
yes. Well,
Teamcenter?
I work in both environments. But yeah, the preview that I sent there, I was connected to Teamcenter, yes.
It's connected to Teamcenter, right? Okay.
Yeah. This is in regards to the preview mode, I'm assuming?
Yeah, this is the one that you shared, right? Open assembly preview for large
Yeah.
assemblies.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I know that we have seen that for Teamcenter, it seems to be cleared out. But if you're facing the same issue when you're working on unmanaged, then I think Ben might have given a solution. It is most probably the feature is locked by your site configurations. So maybe you can check this. I think Ben has already mentioned this. Sangamesh has also mentioned this as well.
Yeah, the preview mode is not available in the managed environment. So instead of that, we can use the threaded bomb expansion, which shows better for assembly opening performance. So for that, we need to enable the seek preference. There is a seek preference which you can set to true. That seek preference is seek expand structure expedite, which should be set to true or 1 on the server side. So in that case, the assemblies have shown a significant performance while opening in managed mode.
All right, thanks, Sangamesh. Now, one other question from Nick was, will the internal files show up in the draft files? I think Mark has already mentioned that, yes, that he's been using this function for a while now. So, yes. I think that's about it, Darren. So, I mean, I think we have addressed most of the questions. There are a couple of questions which have not been addressed. Let me find out and come back to you on this.
Yeah. No, this has been a good session, really comprehensive. So definitely appreciate it. And as a reminder, again, if you haven't bookmarked the link for the forums, please do. It's still on the screen. You have a moment to grab it for everyone who is listening in. And we will get the recording there definitely by Friday. So that is it for us. So
all right.
We'll see everyone in the forums. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you.